Good morning, everyone. It's April 5th. This is the blockchain team meeting. Let's go ahead and do our mainnet check-in. I know that we are a week behind on 2.0.11. It's because there had been some additional testing that we had to do. We can cut release candidate 2 basically whenever, as far as I'm concerned. Thanks, Ludo, for sending your review earlier today for the one out for my outstanding PR. I'll go ahead and merge that after this meeting. And then we can go ahead and do RC2. Unless there's anything else that we feel. Actually, there's one other PR that I think has to make it in before we do the release, and that's Vivithra's mempool PR. Am I forgetting anything?
Sorry, are we trying to get the mempool PR into RC2?
I believe that was the plan, because it was iterating on for quite some time now.
Yeah. At least my recollection is that last week when we talked about it, it was not part of the RC2, but if you can get it done, maybe. But my understanding was that we would not block RC2 on that PR.
Okay, sure. It doesn't have to be RC2, but I do think it's for 2.11 though.
I would argue maybe against including this in 2.11, just because 2.11 is going to have a lot of changes to miner behavior.
Okay.
And yeah, I would rather see 2.11 running smoothly for a while before introducing another change in miner behavior. So.
All right. If that's the consensus, then that's fine. That actually makes it easier to release 2.11. So like other than that, moving on, one issue that I just want to bring to y'all's attention before we run through the issue board was this issue that Pascal opened last night. This was very surprising to me, that index of should cost so much to run. Maybe I'm just out of the loop, I guess. Let me go ahead and find the thing.
Yeah, so this is basically a consequence of us not setting specific runtime costs at the launch of Stacks 2.0.
I see.
Like basically every function has very large constant constants in their cost functions, and index of is a linear function.
Yes.
And so even though like it is actually a very cheap function to evaluate, like it's getting charged a lot.
Yeah, it's being charged, 1,000 runtime per item in the list.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not much we can do about this beyond trying to use the cost voting contract to like lower the cost of this function.
Right. That's my understanding.
Yeah. I think that like these costs were set basically out of like an abundance of caution.
Okay.
At the Stacks 2.0 launch, we probably should be reevaluating these functions for 2.1 just because we have the opportunity to do so.
I know that's on the 2.1 mega thread, but I don't know if there's an issue tracking this. If not, can you go ahead and open it and link this issue?
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I was just looking at this last night. I can send a PR for this separately. I modified Clarity CLI so it would print out runtime costs for the things that it ran. And doing even things like storing a lookup table for, in his particular case, converting a 1 byte buff to a uint, storing that in the marf as a data map is significantly cheaper, oddly enough, than trying to do a single index of, according to the current runtime cost calculation. So maybe we should just have an explainer somewhere that explains that it's not a temporary, it's a temporary thing. It'll get fixed in 2.1, or it can be fixed with the cost voting. I'll send that PR separately. Let's go ahead and run through the board.
Just while we're talking about the runtime cost stuff, can we maybe set up a meeting sometime soon just to like chat about like a plan for actually, making those numbers more accurate?
Yeah, let's talk about that in the discussion section. It's a good idea.
Okay.
Oops.
I did like a little bit of work around that, like pre-mainnet launch, and I'm curious if any of that work can be repurposed. And I don't know, just it feels feels like kind of an important thing for us to get right.
Yeah, it is. Especially in the absence of doing things that let us convert buffs into other types, which is really the source of Pascal's pain here, as well as I know will be the source of like a Bitcoin library that I wrote.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. But like the root cause of Pascal's pain is that the constants are not accurate.
right. Well, actually, even more fundamentally, the root cause of Pascal's pain is that he's making his contract do a bunch of needless parsing. He might just be
Okay.
able to the actual data as a clarity tuple instead of a byte buffer.
Got it.
The only outstanding PR we have on the issue board right now is just my PR. It will be merged today. We have a couple reviews in progress, I think. So I know this guy here, this PR, I'm just correcting a documentation bug, but I know he didn't want to sign the CLA, so we just have to go resend it ourselves. He already said so verbally. So no worry about reviewing this. We'll just send the PR ourselves.
Yeah, I think his PR also is itself a little broken.
Oh, okay.
Because it's using like an earlier version of Clarity that like didn't have strings.
Oops. Okay. Well, either way,
Yeah,
we can fix it.
we can fix it.
Okay. Ludo, what's the status of the graceful termination during initial sync?
So I'm currently handling the feedbacks that you've made.
Okay.
So yeah, I ask for your review today, like next hours or so.
Alrighty, sounds good. Looking forward. Is Pascal on the call? He would have spoken up earlier. We were talking about his other thing. I think that this PR I think is in reasonably good shape. Maybe just one little bit of feedback, but we don't need to talk about it right now because it's not going to make it in 2.0.11. It's going to be for a 2.0.12 at the earliest. And same with the mempool walk order. I'm just going to go ahead and leave a comment on this preview thread just so we know that's going to be scheduled for 2.0.12.
Sure, sounds good.
That said, let's go ahead and hold off on merging it to develop until after 2.0.11 is out the door. Um, 1805, I haven't had time to work on it because I've been trying to get 2.0.11 out the door. Last I checked in with Reed, we're just waiting for another week, I think, until the 15th or so before we have like we talked about this in the architecture meeting. We're just trying to minimize the number of changes we make to the VM so that Reed has a chance to work on decoupling it without having to merge in a bunch of conflicting pull requests. How's that going, Reed?
Yeah, that's I've kind of blocked out this week to work on this. And the Stacks.js stuff I was working on is mostly done at this point. So, but yeah, don't have much progress to report on yet, but we'll have more to say later this week.
All right, sweet. This issue, the performance improvement for inventory synchronization, this is actually reviewer approved. This is part of the fix 2.2407. Oh, oops. New issues, we just talked about this one from Pascal. Show abort by response instead of abort by post condition. I think this might be a bug for the Stacks Explorer or the Stacks API. I think it's making it so that we differentiate between between failed transactions that fail due to a error return or due to a post condition failure. I don't know. I can just move it to the other repo right now. Unless you all think it belongs here.
Yeah, I think we should move it to the other repo.
Okay.
And yeah, if it turns out not to be an API issue, we can always move it back. Very
True. Frieger also requested that we remove requirements for post conditions that are not for TX sender. I think that is not something we're going to do, just because the problem fundamentally is when you send a transaction that calls into a contract that in turn calls into other contracts that themselves could be moving assets, and you have deny mode turned on in your post conditions, all your post conditions have to be aware of all of these other reachable contracts that move those tokens. Otherwise, your transaction will abort because you haven't listed all the things that will move. I think that really there needs to be an API endpoint on the node that lets you simulate a read-write contract call and just reports back the asset map to you. And that asset map can be used by the wallet to generate that list of post conditions, and also to show the user like, hey, by doing this contract call, the following assets will move. Are you okay with this? That said, though, we do have a chance to address some of this behavior in 2.1. Like maybe an option could be like, we have multiple types of deny modes. Like you only care about assets that are directly owned by your address. I don't know if I want to go there necessarily, because you could still quote unquote own assets that are just under management by other contracts. And then it becomes a relatively difficult question of how do you explicitly list out those assets without having to list all of them out. So
yeah, I don't know. Like we could rename this issue to like add additional deny mode, tag it as consensus breaking, and we can discuss it as a 2.1 change in the 2.1 mega thread, or a 2.2 change. Like, yeah, because it could be the case that people are interested in transactions where they just don't care about post conditions on contracts or other users.
that's true. Let's see. And
Since we are talking about post conditions, do you think that post conditions could maybe become some kind of type and clarity that could be serialized and like reused asynchronously?
So the reason we didn't do that is because the post conditions are very cheap to evaluate and have a very compact representation compared to the clarity code that would do the same thing. If you want more elaborate post conditions, like post conditions on your data, for example, you're more than welcome to do this. They would just have to be part of the code itself. Like
so it's not about having post conditions about the data, it's about okay, maybe I can follow up. I don't know if, yeah, okay, I'll follow up. It could be a bit far-fetched.
Okay, we can talk about it at the end of the meeting. Aaron, you want to talk about this briefly? Emit simulated events for delegate stacks in the POX contract.
Yeah, sure. So there's like a request in the API repo about like emitting events whenever a contract call is executed, so that you get like a full stack trace almost of a transaction execution.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a pretty heavy-handed approach to this that could generate a ton of data and also require a ton of special case handling. When really the problem that this issue is trying to deal with is the fact that the POX contract just doesn't emit as many events as would have been useful for an event observer or API. And so one way we can address this without any consensus breaking changes is just emitting simulated events.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Just as like an architectural note, as far as I'm concerned, like any contract that lives under the 0 address of the Genesis block, like that can be special case to hell and back, just because it's effectively part of the chain's consensus code anyway.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, full speed ahead on this if that works for you.
Yeah.
I think this is the okay. I think this is the end of where we were left off last week because we have these 2.1 topics. I do want to confirm though, DeWalker, that the too many peers error that you were seeing, I have not seen that manifest in my PR 2407, and I've had my nodes running for several days now, both publicly and privately.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think we can go ahead and close it. I think what I was going for is if you were able to either conclusively establish that, that bug doesn't exist. So for example, if there was an integration test or regression test that if you ran on 2010 would demonstrate this problem, but then not on in the develop branch, I think that would be at least a good start. Also as a way to prevent regression on this particular front.
Yeah, sure. I think we actually already have an issue open for instrumenting the network test so that they look at the number of open events at the end of a network test and verify that they're 2, like just the server events. It just hasn't been executed on yet.
Okay. Okay. So is that something that we should try and do?
Oh yeah, for sure.
As part of this?
I don't know if it's part of the 2.0.11 release cycle though.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's go ahead and close this because it's a dupe of that then. Sound
Sure.
good?
Yeah.
Cool. I think we're at the end of the normal list of issues here. So go ahead and switch over to 2.1 issues. So I know that maybe we, so up to you guys, like we can talk about this right now. We have time, for example, or we can talk about this separately once 2.0.11 is out the door, just for breaking up or taking on assignment for some of these issues. If anyone wants to volunteer, I'm happy to assign them right now.
I'm not sure if we should do assignment, yeah, through this mechanism. I think like in all likelihood, someone's gonna take on a work stream, like the POX work stream for Stacks 2.1, and then they'll be working on that, or someone else will be working on like evaluating cost structures and things like that. Probably would be useful is if we look at the 2.1 mega thread and there's any outstanding questions in there about what directions we should go. If we can try to resolve those, I think that's probably a better use of this meeting.
Okay, we can do that. I don't think that there's any, I think we've talked about this before. I don't think there's really anything that's like controversial still, unless I'm misreading.
Well, not controversial, but I think maybe related to what Aaron was saying, kind of trying to get to a point where we can essentially bring that thread to a closure with sort of like a well-defined set of Stacks 2.1 items that are more or less committed. And maybe like what we're saying is that the current set of issues that are labeled Stacks 2.1 exhaustively capture everything that has been agreed upon in this thread. Maybe that's the case. I'm not sure.
I don't think it's quite the case, but yeah, we can link them in. Like each of these items, for example, could have multiple trailing issues.
That's fine. We don't need to link the specific issues. Like, if we have everything has a label attached, that's fine. But, just to take like one simple example, like the clarity new methods around, trump and slice or buffer related manipulation stuff, like, is that captured in an issue already? Does that need further discussion? Once we have that list, I think the next step, I would say before we start doing assignments, is actually take that list of issues that are tagged Stacks 2.1 and do kind of a similar exercise that we did for the non-consensus breaking issues, which is, do some t-shirt sizing and some like rough estimates, and also try to do some relative prioritization, because my sense is that, we will quickly realize that this is April, between sort of April, May, June, July. If we have 3 to 4 months of actual development and sort of the total bandwidth we have across the ecosystem for people to do this work, that we won't actually have capacity to do everything that we intend to do or we would like to see happen. So creating some sort of prioritization that would help. And then we can also proactively, go out and, welcome help from the community on specific areas that, we want to get done, but we don't have capacity for. So I think that should be the next step once we have sort of a reasonably solid list of 2.1 tasks.
All right, sounds good. Making a note of that here. All right, maybe next week then we'll have the t-shirt sizing information. Then we can talk about it then.
Sure.
Okay, discussion. Should we reset the test net?
So I mostly just copied over a discussion that Hero or Ludo had started within one of the Hero channels. Ludo, do you want to just talk through where you're coming from on this?
Sure. All right. So, yeah, I think I wanted to get opinions on what we would think about resetting the testnet, and also, yeah, giving a shot to Signet, which is like a new kind of testnet. I think it was released in October or something. And yeah, the idea is to maybe limit the difference in terms of settings between mainnet and testnet. So maybe have like some POX constants more aligned with what we have on mainnet. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree that we should do this. Having POX constants that are, I don't know, like only one order instead of 2 orders of magnitude smaller than mainnet, I think would be very helpful. It would make restarting testnet miners much less painful.
I don't mean to toot my horn here, but fix 2407 makes this a lot faster. It only takes a few hours to boot a testnet node now.
Yeah, well, we'll be testing that later today. Yeah.
Was that change made recently, Jude?
It's not merged to develop yet. It's in a PR branch.
Okay, because I think I built that PR and deployed it to testnet sometime last week, unless you made changes over the weekend. It took 6 hours to sync, which is much better than before. But I think what we see is it always syncs faster on like if you run it on your laptop, but for some reason in testnet, it takes about twice as long as that.
It's probably because there's a lot more reward cycles to process. That's like the big thrust of the fix. It takes away a lot of this accidental quadratic complexity that wasn't really a problem on mainnet because there aren't that many reward cycles, but there's like 1,300 reward cycles on testnet right now. So that quadratic complexity comes back and bites really hard.
No, I think what Charlie's saying is that even on mainnet, like on my laptop, spinning up a mainnet node takes about an hour. But spinning up mainnet nodes on our cluster or super well connected nodes, like the seed nodes, those take like 8 hours, 9 hours, right?
Even that too, yeah. What I was referring to was that idea, but applied to the testnet. What Jude tested, it took him 3 hours to sync to the testnet with that PR built. It took me 6 hours for that node to sync to testnet running in Kubernetes.
Okay, I was using a bare VM for mine, so maybe it's like better. I don't know. There's not as much like load contention potentially. I don't know.
But what you said, Aaron, about mainnet syncing, that's also true.
It takes 2 hours on the Kubernetes cluster.
For mainnet syncing, I think it takes like 4 hours now. I mean, it's not as bad as testnet. I think it takes about like 4 hours now.
So, I mean, one argument in favor of keeping the long-running Xenon testnet alive is that it serves as a living initial boot up test bed for us, so that it gets progressively longer, and thus it gives us something real we can work with to verify that the initial block download phase is sufficiently performant. It's hard to simulate this.
So, I mean, one option is, sorry, go ahead, Ludo, you were saying something.
We were probably about to say the same thing, but yeah, in my proposal, the plan would be to keep like the current testnet around, but stop like spawning explorers and like promoting this network, and instead, so yeah, we would like keep this network alive, but focus on a new testnet with new box constants, and yeah. So yeah, I'm not suggesting to just kill the network, but just stop maintaining it.
So building on top of that idea, what we could do is, so we currently have mainnet, testnet, and reg test running in Kubernetes. So what we could do is take the block data from testnet and just move it into reg test. So reg test new is sort of like the old testnet, and recreate testnet, reset it. So that way, if we want to test a long block download, we would test against reg test, and we would be able to preserve that data.
I respectfully disagree. I think that it's very important to test against the live Bitcoin testnet, because Bitcoin blocks can arrive under far more adversarial conditions on the Bitcoin testnet than a reg test node. And I think that needs to be part of our testing plan. But the Bitcoin testnet can fork, blocks can arrive very quickly in very rapid succession. Like we had a rash of Bitcoin testnet flash blocks, for example, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. So I missed this. I don't know, Charlie, if you were actually advocating getting rid of BTC testnet, but I completely agree. So just stepping back a little bit, I think from Hero's perspective, there are sort of two environments that we're committed to kind of maintain. One is reg test, which is sort of much more, controlled, tighter feedback loop, much more predictable, and that maybe we are much more comfortable sort of resetting it willy-nilly. Then the other is a testnet that is integrated with the Bitcoin testnet. And that is what this discussion is specifically about. So we should kind of keep reg test off the table for this conversation. So I think the only real question here is, I'm not hearing any major opposition to like actually doing a chain reset for the testnet. I think the only maybe thing that we need to settle on is whether there is enough of a reason to keep the current testnet alive in some limited fashion for, if you want to test block downloads or something else, but then basically take the current testnet and reset it with a new testnet if we and keep the current one alive in a different form, in limited form, if we want to preserve it. That's the real question, I think, unless there is other disagreements here.
Well, I like this follow-up comment here from I'm just going to call this guy Pi because I don't want to about having just like an A and a B testnet, where we just keep the Xenon testnet as it exists now alive until the new testnet with the longer reward cycles has achieved a chain length equal to whatever the Xenon testnet is right now. And then we can kill the Xenon testnet, the old Xenon testnet, and then start it again with any new changes we put on since then. I think that might be a reasonable approach here.
Yeah, I don't think we need to necessarily make a decision right now. What I'll do is I'll also take this discussion thread and throw it in the testnet channel if other people want to buy in. I think we've heard from this group, it seems like kind of we can make a decision within Hero as to how to move this forward. Right now, I just want to make sure that we're collecting input and feedback from folks on this call and the broader community. So I can do that as a next step, and we can move on from this topic.
Alrighty, I'm just gonna write that down then. You'll do that, Walker?
Yeah, I can do that.
Come on, paper. Sorry, I think paper just shat itself. So the second question, sorry, once again, paper is not having a good time with itself. Second question is, what do you all think about having this meeting about runtime costs that we talked about earlier? I agree with Aaron that this is probably a work stream in the 2.1 work. Maybe that should be, maybe a right approach here would be like step 1, we have the t-shirt sizing information. Step 2, we use that to form work streams. Step 3, the individual people on the work streams can hold meetings.
Yeah, I think that maybe makes some sense. What I can like try to, so I had like a sort of like project brief for runtime costs in sort of the run up to Stacks 2.0. I can try to update that for Stacks 2.1, and then we can use that as kind of like a jumping off point for the meeting. So like trying to figure out like what's under specified in that brief, things like that. So
do you want to share that brief here?
Sure.
Aaron, would it be helpful for me to include some info in that brief about like some of the work that I did just in trying to you know, do analysis on stacks or clarity functions, and I don't know, I have like a repo with some experimentation.
Yeah, you want to do that?
Yes, definitely.
Sure.
All right, for next time, we will do the POX, the 2.1 t-shirt sizing discussion. And hopefully that will lead to some workstream assignments so we can start cracking on this, because as Walker points out, we have only about 4 months before we have to really start testing, and that's gonna disappear faster than we think it will.
Should we quickly talk about sort of plan for like rest of the day tomorrow, just like path to RC? So I think 2407, or I think the PR was 2549, has sufficient approvals. So let's say we merge that, kind of what needs to happen next. Also, you know, not just in terms of PRs that are remaining, but also what sort of testing we want to do before tagging an actual release build.
Well, at the very least, we need to build RC2 and deploy it and verify it spins up and all that.
Yeah. So there's some testing that, you know, we can do on the nodes that Hero is running. And then maybe Jude, you can do some testing on one of the foundation nodes as well.
Yeah, I think we should aim for like first thing tomorrow, we kick off the release. Does that sound reasonable?
If we can get the testing that you would like to do.
Yeah.
By then.
If we can get
That sounds like surprising timing.
Yeah, because we have to deploy it for the follower and testnet, and I'm assuming the miner as well.
Yeah.
We can't do them both at the same time.
Okay, so that's maybe too optimistic. Apologies.
Yeah, I would say that what we should do, once we have RC2 tagged, we should spin up the testnet miner with RC2. Hero also runs a mock miner in mainnet, and we can test it on that as well.
That would be good. I can do that as well and verify that it's mining appropriately.
Is
Okay.
the mock miner still in a separate branch? Aaron, like, does it need to be updated, or is it all merged in now?
No, it's all merged in. It just like there's just a config flag that's like mock mining equals true or something.
Okay.
Before we break, I do have one more item to discuss briefly. We've been getting more alerts on memory usage for follower nodes in mainnet. Whereas prior to a couple weeks ago, these alerts never happened, or they were extremely rare. So I think that this increase in memory was around the time we upgraded from 209 to 2010. But I can't be sure. We don't, the amount of history that we save for monitoring, it only extends like 3 or 4 days. So what I'm doing right now is I'm deploying 209 to the non-live followers in mainnet to see if their memory usage is significantly different in any way. But when the live and non-live are running 2010, they're both using about the same amount of memory. So whether they're receiving traffic or not, they're using about the same amount of memory. So if 209 shows less memory used on the non-live followers, we might have something interesting there. My understanding is that the change in 2010 was rather small, so it would be unexpected to see a large jump in memory usage there. But I'm not really sure why we're seeing this jump in usage. Possibly just more traffic in general, more nodes on the network. I'm not really sure.
Well, in general, you can expect to see a memory use increase linearly with the number of clients, just because, at least for outbound neighbors, the node does maintain length of chain state for them. It has to, at the very least, for example, store their inventory vectors. It's not very big though. It's, maybe a few hundred bytes, but there's other ancillary state around that too. Like there's the connection struct, there's the conversation struct, there's other things of that nature. And then that's, tied to kernel state too. So that would increase.
Yeah. The seed nodes, they do have a gigabyte more of memory than the followers. So the alerts for the seed nodes are not blaring. It's just the followers. So we could always increase the amount of memory that they're given. I just thought that this would be interesting to report.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that as well. See if we can reproduce that.
Yeah. That's all.
Yeah, keep us posted.
Will do.
All right, is there anything else? All right, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll stop the recording.